Okay, this is going to be the education section. I've got stuff here on one book by Max Weber, which is sociology. I got some media stuff, higher education problems, some history of ed. And by the way, the stuff, this shelf behind me is my education stuff. So at the very top is philosophy of ed. And then I've got stuff on higher education, so university education, and different radical schooling like Montessori or Summerhill and things like that, like free school stuff, psychology, some psychoanalysis, is Freud's in there. This shelf is sociology, language learning, some literacy stuff, a little bit more psychology, and then curriculum is at the bottom. John Dewey books in the corner there, and teacher biography kind of stuff too. Okay, so I'll start with this one. This is history, educating Canadians, a documentary history of public education. I'm doing a bit of that in my dissertation, so I found this for free, which is great. So this is just on Canadian education. Related to that is another one, actually by the same author, Inventing Secondary Education, the Rise of the High School in 19th Century Ontario. That's perfect, because that's where I live. Here's another one. It's called Education or Molasses. And it says, a critical look at the Hall-Dennis Report. So the Hall-Dennis Report was kind of a progressive, it was out of the 60s, progressive education document written by the government, and changed a little bit of the education system at the time. It had a decent philosophy contained in it, a philosophy not. Government documents are usually not philosophical, but this one actually was written like that, so it's a good piece of evidence. So it's that useful in that sense. Here's Free Books for All, and it says the public library movement in Ontario, 1850 to 1930. Not quite related to my research interests, but I thought I might kind of see, especially if they have statistics on borrowing. So I thought it's worth having. Here is, I believe, this is a textbook for kids. It's called, you can't really see it, I'm sure, Life and Literature. This is a textbook for grade 7, printed in 1945. 30 cents it cost. 30 cents. Authorized by the Minister of Education for Ontario. So it's actually pretty neat. So what was it? What did I say? Grade 8? Grade 7? Grade 7. And the kind of stuff they're reading in here is, there's some Charles Dickens. I think beyond what they read today. I'll just show you this first page, and then you can look at it. You can pause the video and just have a look. That's the kind of stuff that grade 7 was. This is literature, right? We're doing in their school. I hope that's not blurry. Hope you can make out that small text. But there's just some authors there that they were doing for, I guess, adventure tales and stuff. But there is Charles Dickens in here, and it looks to be more sophisticated kind of stuff. So interesting. I know there are people ask questions about literacy rates in the 20th century versus today, but I think it's a little bit misleading because the makeup of the population is so different. Like immigration, people come over here and have to learn English, and that's kind of counted. And although there was still lots of immigration going on in the mid-20th century and the early 20th century. Okay, so here's a few books on, I guess just two. I'll do this one first. Here's a book on media. I didn't really know where else to put it. It says Primetime Propaganda, Ben Shapiro. The true Hollywood story of how the left took over your TV. I guess this is probably more politics, but oh well, it's here. You should look up Ben Shapiro on YouTube. He has random interviews on Fox News and other places, and he's actually very well spoken. And he's young. His first book he wrote, I think, is in his mid-20s or something. So he's quite a success, and I wonder what will happen to him later on. So interesting person to follow if you agree with those kinds of politics. Here's another one: Lowering Higher Education, the Rise of Corporate Universities and the Fall of Liberal Education. So I'm interested in liberal education, and I'm interested in kind of the changing nature today of universities in terms of budgeting and cutting costs and all that, and having to compete with online education. But I don't necessarily accept the political rhetoric of those kinds of people. What they say, the phrase they use today is neoliberal. And I had never heard of neoliberal before I started my PhD. I had never heard of neoliberal, but really what it is it's free market. They don't like free market. Free market in education is called neoliberal. It's supposed to be corporatist, like the what's that movement called? The Wall Street protests. All that stuff is supposed to be neoliberal nonsense, although I apparently there's actually quite a few libertarians and stuff in those movements, so they wouldn't agree with neoliberal being a bad thing. Just means free market. So I don't agree. I'm with them in terms of what's happening, but I don't in terms of being interested in what's happening, but I don't agree with the cause as them. Okay, here is another one on higher education. The Dumbest Generation. I've actually been looking for this for a while and finally found it randomly at a library sale. This is by Mark Bauerlein. How the Digital Age Stupefies Young Americans and Jeopardizes Our Future. I haven't read this, so I don't know what the thesis of the book is in terms of, you know what, let me just give me a second, I'll just find out. This is actually pretty good. I'll just read the back. So, they are the dumbest generation. They enjoy all the advantages of a prosperous, high-tech society, period. Digital technology has fabulously empowered them, loosened the hold of elders. Yet adolescents use these tools to wrap themselves in a generational cocoon filled with puerile banter and coarse images. The founts of knowledge are everywhere, but the rising generation camps in the desert, exchanging stories, pictures, tunes, and texts, savoring the thrill of peer attention. If they don't change, they will be remembered as fortunate ones who were unworthy of the privileges they inherited. They may even be the generation that lost that great American heritage forever. I absolutely agree with the last part. I don't think the current generation, the Tumblr generation and the social media generation and the iPhone generation, I don't think they really can replace their parents in terms of, and I don't even think their parents really replaced their parents in terms of what was required to maintain a prosperous society. They're far richer than their parents were, but they're going to consume those riches rather than produce them, rather than maintain their production. Another thing is that recall that a lot of the immigration, if I just speak of the States, for example, a lot of the immigration in the States, especially during the World War II, was flight from socialism. Flight from just totalitarian and Eastern Europe, Russia, Germany, of course, Italy. And those people came here, Germans, whatever they may be, and they were fleeing something, and they were aware of those things, and they did not want it, and they wanted to come to a free country, free America, right? That kind of impulse, that kind of fear of government control is not in the youth. Only their parents, only their grandparents, really. And so it's going to come back again. just like when the American Revolution began, those people were mostly British, but they came to America, some of them for religious reasons, but they knew what it was like to live under a monarch. They knew it. They had lived it. Just like these people that immigrated to North America knew what it was like to live under a kind of socialism. They knew it, but the youth today do not. They have no idea. They don't mind government raising taxes because they don't pay it. Not yet, anyways. They don't mind those things. They think that increasing welfare benefits and all that kind of stuff is just a good thing because they don't understand where it comes from. They just have no idea. So it's gonna be a big problem, and I see a decline happening. It's gonna keep going. It's gonna get worse. In Canada, we've been losing lots of jobs up here, factories moving out, and all that kind of stuff. It's coming down. It's going to happen, and it's very unfortunate. So I think that's going to be a great book. What exactly does the digital age do? What actually does technology do? I don't know, so I'm glad to find out. The only thing I could think of at the top of my head is spell check ruins people's literacy, maybe. But otherwise, I'd like to hear more of what they have to say. One thing will be interesting to find out if there's somehow, I'm sure someone's done a study, but I just wouldn't know how to locate it. Is it possible to compare people who read books, let's say 100 years ago, 50 years ago, probably 50 years ago, and the same people who don't own a lot of books but read them on e-readers? Has that population of readers been maintained per capita, let's say? I have no idea, but that would be interesting to find out. Okay, there's two more here. So here's Max Weber, certainly a sociologist, bureaucracy guy. You probably, if you know anything about Max Weber, you'll know about bureaucracy. But he does have this book also talking about the connection between Protestantism and capitalism. And the last one is on Montessori, which I'm very interested in. A review, it's called Montessori Today by Orem, O-R-E-M, a review of the programs, innovations, and successes of more than 100 Montessori schools, an invaluable guide for both the parent and the teacher. So that's wonderful. This is a giant case study and comparison of all kinds of instances of Montessori schools, which is very important because unfortunately, Maria Montessori, did not copyright her name. Anyone can start a Montessori school tomorrow. They can just put a sign out and say they're a Montessori school. There's no regulation. I guess there isn't any regulation. There are professional organizations. There is the AMI, which is the American Montessori Institute, and there isn't an international one. There is an international one. I don't know what it's called though. And depending on the profession organization, and then again, depending on the school, they will be more orthodox Montessori versus more modern Montessori, whatever that means. And so it's unfortunate because if you want to send your kid to a Montessori school because you like Montessori's philosophy of early learning and her epistemology and things like that, for how the mind works, the early mind, the young mind, you can't depend on a school just calling itself Montessori. You have to go there, visit the school, get some documents they have, maybe some brochures on what their philosophy is, how they interpret Montessori, what they incorporate into the Montessori curriculum, what kinds of didactic materials they use, and their grade progression. You have to kind of still do all the research. Just because someone sticks the name Montessori in the school, you know they know of Montessori. It's not going to be a public school, but you still have to do a lot of work to figure out whether it's what you want. So, okay, next is going to be classics.